Hi, welcome to Veterans Back to Class program, coordinated with the Veterans Memorial Center and the Cape Canaveral chapter of the Military Officers Association. My name is Joe Titchich. I'm a retired Air Force guy, and I'm representing the local chapter of MOA. What I'm going to talk about here is I'm going to talk about the armed services, the armed forces, I should say, and the different components of the services. What I mean by that is the active duty, the reserve, and the guard. I may scatter a little bit and talk about the specific services themselves, meaning the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, the Space Force, and the Coast Guard. But the primary focus in here is to identify for you, students of Brevard, the opportunities that may be available in your future. There's going to be a lot of different disciplines that I'm going to bring up, different opportunities such as, well, I'm going to talk specifically about plumbing. That's going to be one of the things. But there's a lot of other opportunities that are available in these different components that you may not realize. Just to clarify, the term services, when it comes to the armed forces of the U.S., the term services relates to the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, the Space Force, and the Coast Guard as well. So that's the term services mean that. The component refers to active duty, reserve, or National Guard. So just to make sure we've got that clarified. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I enlisted in the Air Force in 1974, which is a long, long time ago. And I went to active duty. I was on active duty for 4 years in the Air Force. And then I spent 7 years in the Reserve. I got out of the Air Force, and the primary reason was I wanted to go to college for an electrical engineering degree, which I did get. So I got the engineering degree, and I started working for a company that as an electrical engineer, but I also stayed in the Air Force Reserves. Now, I was in the Reserves for a while, and then I decided to go to the Air National Guard. So I went to the Air National Guard, not realizing that I would spend over 25 years in the Air National Guard as well. So that's my background. I've got a little bit of experience on active duty, a little bit of experience in the Reserve, as well as a good portion of my wearing a military uniform was in the Air National Guard. I will also tell you that the last 3 years of my wearing the uniform, I was deployed, and that term will come up a little bit later, the word deployed. I was activated to active duty, Air Force active duty, and I was an Air Force active duty lieutenant colonel at the time. And I was deployed to several different locations in the world, and I'll maybe get to that in a little bit later. So again, the information. Oh, there's Don. The information that I'm going to present is to clarify is to talk about the similarities and the differences between active duty, guard, and reserve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you in a position to think about that. Let's say you have a desire or a passion to be a plumber. That's one of the things after you get out of high school. College just really isn't your thing, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you have an intention to be a plumber or a maintenance man on a vehicle maintenance, or something along those lines. But I'm going to stick to the example that you want to be a plumber. The other example I'm going to use 3 examples, and one is a lawyer. So you want to go to law school, you want to practice law, regardless of what the particular avenue in the lawyer world is going to be. So that, and the other thing I want to invite you to think about, that you're going to be a manager of a company, manager of a grocery store, manager of a small electronics company, but you're the manager, you're the main person in charge of that particular one. So with those 3 things in mind, I'm going to proceed and talk about active duty, and then I'm going to talk about the reserve, and then I'm going to talk about the guard. So before I get to talking about the plumbers and the lawyers and the manager, let me clarify something about the services and the components. In the active duty, I want to talk about Army for an example, and then Air Force for another example, but the similar numbers fall into suit. In the U.S. Army, let me say this, the total number of people in the considered to be in the military of the U.S. is over 2 million, just a little over 2 million. Of that number in the U.S. Army, 1 million is total in the Army. Active duty is about 470,000. Reserve, Army Reserve is 190,000. And the National Guard is over 330,000. So the National Guard has more people in the Army than the Army Reserves, but the total on active duty is more than either one of them. So the numbers are similar. My point is that there's certain numbers, certain percentage, and there's going to be a slide that we're going to show to you, clarifying the differences between the services, and again, the services mean Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, and Coast Guard. And the components, National Guard, Army or Reserve, and active duty. One thing I would also just clarify, the Army and the Air Force are the only ones that have National Guard. In other words, there's an Army National Guard and there's an Air National Guard. There is no such thing as a Navy National Guard. It's only Army National Guard and Air National Guard. Stop that. One thing that I wanted to show everyone here is in this pie chart. This pie chart represents the total number of people. For example, when I say total number of people in the Army, it includes active duty, Reserve, and National Guard. And when you look at this slide, it shows that the U.S. Army is 47% of the armed services of the U.S. The Marine Corps is 10. Space Force is actually, it says 0, but it's 0.1% because it's relatively new. And the Air Force is, what does it say there? 23%, and the Navy 18%. So it gives you an idea of the percentages in total with the active duty, the armed forces, and the comparison between the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Coast, and Coast Guard. What I'd like to do now is to talk about to expand on the three career fields, is what I would call them: the plumber, the lawyer, and the manager of a company. Now let me start out with the plumber. Let's say you get out of high school and you want to be a plumber, and you decide to go on active duty in the Air Force. Let's say that. So you would go in the Air Force, you would enlist, you would go to a technical school, and when you enlist, that means that is your full-time job. You don't have a job somewhere else besides that. You are completely focused and living the world in the Air Force. Where you get stationed, you may go to basic training at one location, the technical school may be at a different location, and then your first assignment or your first base where you're going to be working in your plumbing career field could be a third location. It could be overseas. It could be in Alaska, it could be in Korea, it could be in California. You just don't know, because big Air Force and big military decides where you go. You don't really have a choice on where you're going to go. And for the most part, that's true. There are very rare exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's how it works. So you go to tech school and you get very proficient in the plumbing world, and you go to your base. And then for the first 4 years, let's say you signed up for 4 years, that is your job, and that's the only job that you do. You wake up in the morning, you go to work at 7:30 in the morning, you get off at 4:30, you go back home. The next day, it's a Monday through Friday job for the most part, and that's your job, taking care of the plumbing situation on a particular Air Force base. Now, in addition to that, you're wearing the uniform not necessarily to be a plumber, but you're wearing the uniform in case there's a war that happens somewhere, or someone's threatening the safety of the United States citizens, and you as a military member are part of the big baseball bat that defends the United States. You may deploy overseas for a few months and apply that plumbing field to a deployment location. You may do that, and that's very common in these particular days. So you may deploy to a different location overseas. You may be in the Middle East. You may be maybe not so much Afghanistan anymore, but you may be in the Middle East, in Somalia, wherever the particular action is happening. You may get deployed there. After your deployment period, you would come back to your home base, as it's called, and you would finish out your first year enlistment. Now, after that first year enlistment, you may decide to enlist another 4 years. And once that's done, you may get transferred to a different location in the world. And you would perform the same type of thing at that location. And after 4 more years, you may decide to enlist for 4 more and continue to do that particular thing. And you can stay in your career field that entire time. For 20 years, after 20 years, you can fully retire and start drawing a retirement pension. You can start drawing retirement pension immediately, at which time you can get out of the military and get a civilian job as a plumber and then continue that particular field. But your association with the active duty military is completely severed at that point. You may decide to stay on. I don't think you can join the reserves. After you retire from the military service, you can't join the reserves or the National Guard. You can still visit with them and things like that. So let me stop there and switch over to the lawyer world. The lawyer scenario is very similar. However, the lawyer world, you would be trained, let's say you're in the Marine Corps, and there's a television program for the Marine Corps. I can't remember what it's called, but so you're a military, you're in the military, you're in the Marine, you're wearing a Marine uniform, but the Marines have sent you off to college to be a lawyer, and you're wearing that uniform throughout the entire time, very similar to what I just described about the plumber, but you're performing legal services to the Marine and the Navy, and possibly some other locations as well. But you may bounce around, you may be on a ship, you may be at different locations in Marine Corps facilities around the world, and a similar type of thing. After 4 years, you would extend, or could extend. You could get out after 4 years if you wanted to, but for people that want to stay, make a career of the military, that's what they would do. The same thing would hold true for what I talk about as a manager of a company. And the idea with a manager of a company, specifically why I say that is, normally officers, regardless of what their, for the most part, regardless of what their degree is in, they become basically managers of an organization, whether it's a civil engineering corporation or organization, supply organization, admin organization. They're basically managers of the folks that are doing the actual technical work. And the same thing is true for them. Their careers can continue on until 20 years. If they want to stay on, they might be able to stay on. But typically after 20 years, a military member will say, thank you very much, did a good job. Or the military might say, thank you very much, but we can't use you any longer. We've got too many people that are coming up that we need to give them the opportunity as well. Okay, so let me go through a couple of questions from the audience here, and I've got some questions written down here, and I want to touch base on just a couple of these before I start talking about the Guard. First of all, one question is, can a person change services, like going from the Navy to the Air Force? And the answer is yes. Dependent upon a couple of things. Number one, your contractual commitment, if you will, to the Navy needs to be satisfied, and the Navy needs to be willing to let you go. Or let's say you're done with your 4 years and you can go anywhere you want to. But to go in the Air Force, the particular job that you want to go into, if it's not available, then you either say, no, I don't want to go in the Air Force, or I'll go into a completely different field but you could still do that. The short answer is yes, you can do that, but there are some conditions upon that transfer. To retire in the reserves, can you take a year off? Let's say you're in the reserve for like 7 years and you don't have 20 years yet, but you want to take some time off to do whatever. The answer is yes, you can take time off. You could say like 4 years and you don't have anything to do with the military whatsoever. And then you decide, well, I want to get back into the reserve. The answer is yes, if the reserves has a position for you, and because it's like joining a company, a civilian company. If they don't have any openings, you're not going to be able to get in there. If they have openings that you are qualified for, then yes, you can do that. You can get back into that particular thing. Is the pay the same for active duty, guard, and reserve? And the answer is yes. It depends on the number of years that you have. It depends on the rank that you hold. So the answer is yes. It's all based on that particular same portion. In other words, if you're in the Coast Guard as an E, the E meaning the enlisted, is an E4, you're getting the pay the same as an E4 that's in the Guard, in the Army Guard, or any kind of military service. The pay scale is identical. And again, before I dive into the Guard, let me just mention the couple of things: the active duty and the reserve. The active duty and the reserve report to the commander-in-chief for the military, and in the case of the U.S., it's always the President of the United States. So again, this is going to change when I talk about the Guard, but the active duty and the reserve supplements the active duty when needed, but the reserves on drill weekend and whenever they're activated, just like the active duty, they report to the commander-in-chief, which is the President of the United States. Let me talk briefly about the rank structure. In the rank structure, for pay-wise, it goes E1, which is when you first join, you're usually an E1.
Recruit.
If you're enlisted, you're recruited as an E1, right? Thanks, Paul. So the enlisted ranks go from what's called E1 to E9. In the officer world, or the manager, what I talked about, the manager world is usually an O1 to O10. Now the O10s, there aren't any more of those, and they're called 5-star generals. And the last living one was Omar Bradley, and that was quite a number of years ago. So today there are no 5-star generals, there are no O10s, but there's a few O9s quite a few O9s running around. But there's also another field called the warrant, and warrant is W1 through W5, and they're a technical field, but I don't want to get too confusing here about that. So for the most part, what I like to say is whether you're in the Army, whatever service you're in, if you're at E3, you're getting paid as an E3 in whatever other service there is. And that pay is the same as if you're in the Guard or Reserve. It's a little different calculation in the Guard or Reserve, but you're getting paid the equivalent amount. So, any questions on that from the audience? Okay, let me talk about the Air National Guard. Or excuse me, let me talk about the National Guard and focus on that particular thing. Let me use the same example of the plumber and the lawyer and the manager as well. So if you take everything I said about the reserve, where you go on active duty for a while, in fact, let me pause there just a second. No, let me forget that. You can actually join the reserve or guard without ever going on active duty. You can join, let's say you get out of high school and you want to join the Guard right away. You can do that, and you can spend 20 years doing nothing but the Guard, and you retire from there. You don't have to go to active duty in order to join the Guard or Reserve. You don't have to do that. So what I'd like to do now is talk about the Guard, and specifically the National Guard. And what I'd like to do is to clarify that you don't have to join an active duty component, the active duty service, in order to join the Guard. You can join the Guard at any time. Let's say that you're out of high school for 6 years and you want to join the Guard. You can do that, or you can at least try to. if there, again, it goes back to if there's any openings and you have the qualifications, yes, then you can get in there. So let's say that you want to join the Air National Guard right out of high school. So you join the Air National Guard and you want to be a plumber on the weekend side of the house. But on the weekday side of the house, you've gone to college, you've taken classes to be an accountant, and that's what you want to do, and that is your passion that you've always had, is to be an accountant. So in the civilian world, you become an accountant, and then on the weekend side of the house, you decide you want to be a plumber. It has nothing to do with accounting, not one single bit, but you're able to do both of those particular things. Now, when you go in the Air National Guard, you still have to go to basic training. Everybody goes to basic training. And for the Guard, you would go to a plumbing school, and that would be your profession on the weekend. So if you can follow me on this. On the civilian side, you're an accountant, but every drill weekend, you're a plumber. And that is certainly possible. And you do this for 20 years, and that is a possibility. Now, the main difference with the Guard, and just a reminder that the Guard is the Army National Guard or the Air National Guard. There's no such thing as a Coast Guard National Guard. There's no such thing as a Navy National Guard. There is only Army National Guard and Air National Guard. And you say, Joe, why is that? Well, here's the reason why. Every state and territory associated with the United States, and when I say every state and territory, everybody I hope knows what the states are, but the territories are Washington, D.C., the Virgin Islands, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Every one of those locations has an Air National Guard unit and an Army National Guard unit. So every single organization, you say, well, why is that? It's because the National Guard, their primary reporting official is the governor of that particular state or territory. Let me say that again. The active duty side of the house, the active duty and reserves, they report primarily and only to the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States. The National Guard first reports to the governor of the state or the territory, and that's why when you may see some disasters, some natural disasters like tornadoes or hurricanes, and you see a military uniform out there. Every single military uniform that you see out there is a National Guard member from that territory. It could be from a adjacent state, but that military uniform wearing individual is a member of the National Guard of that particular state in most cases. So, the Air National Guard, there's a lot of Air National Guard bases. There's one in every single state. In most of those states, there's actually a flying unit that's assigned to that particular state. You say, why is there a flying unit? Well, one of the reasons is because, again, for natural disasters, if you have C-130s that are flying around, they're help transport things and things like that. So, again, the Air National Guard reports to the governor. However, the Air National Guard can also be activated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Services. So the National Guard, Army and Air National Guard, they have two bosses. They have the governor of the state, and they have the Commander-in-Chief. And the reserves and the Guard, or the reserves and the active duty, have the Commander-in-Chief. So the National Guard has a dual function, if you will. The pay is the same, the uniforms are the same, and when the National Guard or Reserve deploy or go overseas, everybody has the same uniform on. And when you're deployed and you overseas and you see someone with a uniform on, you can never tell if they're active duty, Guard, or Reserve. Kind of a fun thing to think about. So let me take a couple more questions. Are there positions that are unique to each component? In other words, are there trades that are unique to the Coast Guard, or unique to that are not in any other service? And I would say yes. And I can cite one particular example that I know of, In the Air National Guard, there are 17 units that are scattered around. When I say units, they're tied to another guard unit they report to in the state. But there's 17 guard units in the country that do nothing but specialize in communication equipment, radars, fiber optic installation, and there's only 17 in the Guard, and there's only one on active duty, but that's unique. The Army, the Air National, or the Air Force Reserve has no units that are like that. So, yes, there are unique cases like that. Can someone be in the Guard and Reserve at the same time? No. You're either in one component or the other. You can't belong to both. I don't know why you'd want to do that. If I'm in the reserves and my job transfers me, my civilian job transfers me to another state, what options do I have? Well, you have three options. Number one, you can get out completely. Number two, you can, let's say you transfer from New York to California, and you want to stay with the unit that's in New York, but your civilian job has moved you to California. You can still stay with that unit in the reserves. There's a couple options, but you can still do that. You can either fly back on drill weekends, or you can put in for a transfer to a different reserve unit with similar backgrounds in California. You can do that. So yes, you can transfer like that. That exists. Let me tell you a story if I could. This is kind of a fun time for a little break, and here's a story. No, I'm going to tell everybody this. This is a fun. This has to do with chocolate chip cookies. You might say, boy, this is going to be good. I was deployed to Qatar, a little country in the Middle East, and you can look that up. And it's, there's a base there that, well, I just say the job that I was doing, I had some of these, as I mentioned, the Air National Guard people doing that special communication equipment. And I had like 60 individuals scattered around the Middle East and Afghanistan. In Iraq, they were in Qatar, they were in Kuwait, they were all over the Middle East, and they were also in Afghanistan installing specialized communication equipment. And I was in charge of all these guys all around that area. My wife would send me boxes of homemade chocolate chip cookies, and she would send that to me so I could give them to my staff. And I did partake in a few of those myself, and they were very good. I had my boss contacted me one day. He says, we have a special radar that needs to be installed over in Afghanistan. The only people that can do it are your two guys that are in Iraq right now, so get them over there and get that installed, and get them over there right now. So I had a captain, and I said, Captain, go over to the flight operations and find out how to get those guys over there right away. Boom. He came back after a couple minutes, and he says it'll take maybe a week to get those guys out of Iraq on a plane to fly, and get over there. I said, Captain, that's unacceptable. Go back there and tell him And he, boom, off he goes. He comes back. Nope. So I took a bag of those homemade chocolate chip cookies, and I went over to flight operations and bribed a active duty Marine Corps captain who was scheduling all that stuff with this bag of cookies, and those guys were out of Iraq in 18 hours. So that's a true story. That's a fun chocolate chip story. Okay, a couple more questions. Are there National Guard bases overseas? No. Well, besides, with the exception of the Virgin Islands. When I say outside the contiguous United States, what I mean is Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and I'm missing one. Anyway, so yes, they're outside the contiguous United States, but they're not in Germany. They're not in, the overseas locations. They're just not there. And that's true for the reserve units as well. I don't know of any reserve units that are located outside. There are active duty bases scattered around all around the world, many of those. So I'm at the end of the presentation here, and I hope there was some good information that you got. I want to remind everybody that this presentation is a Veterans Back to Class presentation organized by the Veterans Memorial Center where I am right now in Merritt Island. If you have a chance, stop on in. There's an incredible center that's here with a lot of great information. And also a joint adventure with the Cape Canaveral chapter of the Military Officers Association of America. What I've tried to do is to explain the differences between the active duty, and similarities, I should say, the active duty, the reserve, and the National Guard. Someone once asked me, said, "You've been in all those different ones, which one did you like best?" And my answer is, they're all good. It's the same way with the services. The services, every single service has a different mission, but it depends on what you want. I mean, if you want to be on a Coast Guard ship repairing engines, don't go in the Army. If you want to be an Air Force pilot or take care of Air Force planes, don't join the Marines. But if you want to challenge and be in the Marines, you want to do all that other stuff, the Marines is the best place for you. So there's no such thing as the best service. They're all good. It's whatever's best for you. And in the components, the active duty, the reserve, or the guard, again, it's similar type of thing. Whatever is best for you, whatever works out for you, is whatever's the best one. Again, this is a presentation, and the purpose was for the Guard. I explained the difference between the Guard, active duty, and reserve. If you have any questions, I certainly would welcome those questions. Go through that through the school, and they'll get them to me. I wish you well, and thank you for letting me present this to you. Joe Titchich out.